Picture this, a small hill in Japan. On one side, a few hundred warriors, armed with swords and centuries of tradition. On the other, an army of 30,000, armed with modern rifles and the future. This is the story of the Battle of Shiroyama, the dramatic, bloody, and final stand of the samurai. So let's set the scene. The year is 1877, and Japan is going through some radical changes. You've got the old ways of the feudal warrior class clashing head-on with a new, modernizing government. And right here, on this hill, that clash is about to come to a really violent end. And this all brings us to the big question, right? Why? Why would you make a stand when you know defeat is practically guaranteed? What were they even fighting for? You see, this was never just about winning a battle. It was about making a statement with their very lives. Okay, so the Battle of Shiroyama wasn't some random event. It was actually the final, desperate chapter of a much bigger conflict, the Satsuma Rebellion. This was basically a civil war that pitted these traditionalist samurai against the new imperial government. The rebellion was led by a super charismatic and respected guy named Saigō Takamori. And when it started, he had a pretty formidable army of 20,000 samurai. But, after months of fighting and a string of defeats, his forces were just whittled away. Now he's got a core group of just 500 loyalists left, and they're trapped on Shiroyama Hill, looking down on their own home city. I mean, just look at the numbers here. It is an absolute mismatch. You've got 500 samurai rebels going up against 30,000 imperial soldiers. That's 60 imperial soldiers for every single samurai. The odds weren't just bad, they were completely impossible. So when you've got that kind of numerical advantage, you might think it's an easy win. But the imperial commander, General Yamagata Aritomo, well, he decided to leave absolutely nothing to chance. His strategy was simple: complete and total annihilation. This photo here actually shows the siege lines. The Imperial Army built this whole complex system of trenches and fortifications to completely surround the rebels. They basically built a cage around the hill. And if that wasn't enough, they brought in 5 warships to shell the position from the sea, just to make absolutely sure there was no escape. For the samurai trapped inside this cage, the situation was just bleak. They were under constant artillery fire, running low on pretty much everything. They even had to melt down metal statues just to make bullets. They had no real medical supplies, and there were reports they were using a carpenter's saw to treat wounds. It was just a grim, hopeless situation. All right, let's get to the final moments. The date is September 24th, 1877. The Imperial Army sends one last demand for surrender. They get nothing but silence in return. The stage is set for the final bloody act. So after a full night of artillery bombardment, the cannons suddenly fall silent. Then, at 4 a.m. in the pitch-black darkness before dawn, the all-out assault begins. 30,000 men start charging up that hill. And for a little while, the samurai lines actually held, but they were just overwhelmed. It was a tidal wave of soldiers. With all their ammunition gone, Saigō's men did the only thing their warrior code would let them do. They drew their swords for one last, desperate charge, straight into the guns of the modern world. And at this crucial moment, their leader, Saigō Takamori himself, gets hit by a bullet. He's mortally wounded in his stomach and thigh. He knows it's over. So his loyal follower, Beppu Shinsuke, carries him to a quiet spot to perform the final ritual of the samurai. So this ritual, seppuku, was seen as the only honorable way for a samurai to die in defeat. It was this final act of control, of defiance, choosing your own death over the shame of being captured. And Beppu acted as Saigō's second, his kaishakunin, which means he completed the ritual and then hit his master's head so the enemy couldn't take it as a trophy. With their leader gone, Beppu and the last few remaining warriors, with no bullets, no hope, nothing left, they just drew their swords and charged straight downhill into the imperial lines. They were all cut down in a hail of gunfire. And with their deaths, the Battle of Shiroyama and the entire Satsuma Rebellion was over. The silence that fell over that hill, well, it signaled more than just the end of a battle. It was truly the end of an era. The consequences of this one-sided fight would literally reshape Japan's military, its economy, and its whole society. Let's talk about the cost. And I don't just mean in lives. The financial cost was just astronomical. Putting down this rebellion cost the government 420 million yen. That's a sum so huge it nearly bankrupted the new nation and actually forced it off the gold standard. But the battle's real legacy was much deeper than money. This was the final nail in the coffin for the samurai as a military class. It proved once and for all that a modern army of regular people, drafted into service, armed with rifles, could beat even the most legendary warriors. And it was the last time a major internal rebellion would ever challenge the emperor's authority. So what about Saigō Takamori, the rebel leader? Well, this is where the story takes a fascinating turn. In 1877, he died an enemy of the state, a traitor. But just 12 years later, the emperor officially pardoned him. And today, he's revered as a tragic hero, a symbol of loyalty and the traditional samurai spirit. There are statues of him all over. Which leaves us with this one big lingering question. Was this last stand at Shiroyama just a foolish rebellion against the inevitable march of progress? Or was it the ultimate display of honor, a conscious choice to die by an ancient code in a world that just didn't have a place for it anymore? Honestly, the answer to that is probably what makes this story so powerful, even all these years later.